What's going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here, and I want to talk to you about an X-Men book. X-Men Deadly Genesis, written by Ed Brubaker and drawn by Trevor Hairsine and Scott Hanna. This is a 6-issue miniseries that retcons the events of Giant Size X-Men issue 1, where we were told that Professor Xavier gets a team of mutants to rescue the original X-Men. And this story tells us that before he got Wolverine, Storm, Nightcrawler, Thunderbird, Sunfire, and Banshee, and Colossus, before he got all of those guys to rescue the original X-Men, he had gotten another team of mutants. And they all go, and they all seemingly died on Krakoa, and then he mind wipes anybody who had any knowledge of these characters, and then in the present day, the Scarlet Witch has depowered most of the mutant population, and as Beast says in this book, energy cannot be created or destroyed. So what happened to all of that energy? It all goes to Krakoa, which the whole island was shot into outer space back in Giant Size X-Men issue 1, and this energy wakes up one of the mutants who was on that rescue team, and then he goes back to Earth to try and get revenge on Charles Xavier for A, not sending anybody to rescue him, and B, then making everybody forget that he even existed. This book is really terrible, guys. I don't think that there is any redeeming aspect to this book. It's really bad. It's a lot worse than I remembered it being the last time I read it. And admittedly, it's been like 9 years since I read it, but I remembered liking it quite a bit the last time I read it. But this time, I was surprised that I liked anything about it the last time I read it. I want to talk a little bit about retcons. I do not have anything against retcons in general. I think that a retcon can be a good thing. It can sometimes make a story better. For example, Alan Moore's run on Swamp Thing began with a retcon that completely turned that series on its head, and it made the series better than what it had been before. So I think retconning things doesn't have to be a bad thing. I know a lot of people who just hate retcons, period. I am not one of those people. I think that retcons can work, but they have to work in such a way where they don't make the previous stories that came before make no sense. And the problem, one of the problems with Deadly Genesis is that all of the retcons that we get here, they make previous stories make less sense than they did originally. For example, Maury McTaggart. Maury McTaggart was the guardian of these 4 kids that Charles Xavier sends to rescue the X-Men. And after they die, seemingly die, she is furious with Charles Xavier, rightly so. And she goes home and makes this tape and says, Charles Xavier is one of the worst people ever. He sent these kids off to die, and I hate him. And then she marks this tape, important information on Charles Xavier. And then she takes it to this secret shack on Muir Island, and then she hides the tape. This doesn't make any sense for 2 reasons. Number one, if this information is important, why are you putting it on a tape and hiding it and not telling anybody about this tape? The reason is that all of this story didn't even come about until the year 2006, and the character of Maury McTaggart was introduced in like 1977 or 1978. And so the previous 25 years of Maury McTaggart, before she was killed in like the early 2000s, the previous 25 years of this character, nobody had any idea about this story. Ed Brubaker just creates this MacGuffin so that the X-Men can find out about this secret team that was sent to rescue the X-Men, and it doesn't make any sense from a character point of view why Moria would put this tape out there and then just hide the tape and not tell anyone about it. If it's really that important, you need to tell everyone about it. Why would you even make a tape at all? Just go tell people that Charles Xavier is terrible. Also, this makes her earlier appearances in the X-Men comics make absolutely no sense at all, because Maury McTaggart came to the X-Men around 77, 78, something like that, and she says, okay, my name is Maury McTaggart, I'm going to help run things around here. It was later revealed that she was an ex-girlfriend of Professor X, but she was still a respected colleague, and she clearly didn't have any beef with Professor X at that point. As of this story, it does not make any sense at all that Maury would ever go back to Charles Xavier for any reason at all. She should still be mad at him right up until her dying breath. It makes no sense at all that she would go back to the mansion and seemingly be pretty cool with him for sending these 4 kids off to die. This retcon makes absolutely no sense, and the only reason this retcon is here is to, I don't know, I guess celebrate the anniversary of Deadly Genesis. I think this was the 30th anniversary of Deadly Genesis. I guess it's meant to celebrate that story, but this makes no sense. Furthermore, another thing that makes no sense is the existence of Vulcan, who is the one who comes back to life and wants revenge on Charles Xavier. There's several things about him that don't make any sense at all. Number one, he is the 3rd Summers brother. This is a subplot that had been teased since the early 90s, right around the time, it was shortly after the Executioner's song. Mr. Sinister was meeting with Cyclops, and he said something about you and your brothers. And then Cyclops said, you mean brother, singular, right? I only have one brother, Havoc. And Sinister's like, oh, yeah, that's what I meant. And ever since then, everyone's been like, ooh, there's another Summers brother, at least one more, maybe more. And I believe Fabian Nicieza wanted the Summers brother to be Adam X the Extreme. But his idea was that he was going to be half Shi'ar, and that it was going to be Alex and Scott's mom who had slept with some Shi'ar guy, and then gave birth to Adam X the Extreme. That would mean that he's not a Summers. That would mean that he is their half-brother on their mom's side. Some people were thinking, okay, maybe after Catherine was killed by Emperor Dakin, maybe Corsair went out and had sex with some alien, and he's still a half-brother, but he's still a half-Summers brother, and maybe he's their half-brother from their dad's side, which any of those situations would not make any sense with Mr. Sinister, because he would have no reason to know about some alien who had never been to Earth or had been born off-world. So that wouldn't make any sense. So then you're thinking, okay, if Mr. Sinister knows of the existence of a third Summers brother, then maybe there's an older brother that Scott and Alex didn't know about, and maybe Mr. Sinister knows where this older brother is. They didn't go in that direction either. The direction that they went was probably the most convoluted, confusing way of creating a third Summers brother. I feel like any other way that you could have done this would have made more sense and would have been less confusing and convoluted. The way that they went about this is that the four Summerses, they were all in an airplane, and then they're getting attacked by a Shi'ar warplane or something. Scott and Alex parachute to safety. Corsair and Catherine are kidnapped, and then Emperor Dakin, he wants to have sex with Catherine. She resists, and then he kills her, but she was 2 months pregnant, according to this story, and then he rips the baby out of her stomach. It's very gross and graphic, and then they put the baby in this artificial time chamber, which makes the baby older, and then they send it back to Earth to be a slave to Eric the Red, who was this Shi'ar agent who appeared like once. Actually, technically, Eric the Red has appeared a couple of times over the years, but that's a discussion for another time. So this boy was sent to be a slave to Eric the Red, and then somehow he escapes, and then Maury McTaggart finds him and makes him one of her charges. Okay, all of that is a really stupid, really dumb way of creating this extra Summers brother who is roughly the same age as Alex, and basically it's all just extremely stupid stuff that Ed Brubaker introduces just so that he can have an extra Summers brother. And like I said, I have no idea if Marvel said, okay, you need to create a third Summers brother, you need to go ahead and tie that up, or if this was something that Brubaker introduced. But he's creating so much extra work for himself just to add this extra Summers brother, when there would have been so many more easier ways of creating another Summers brother. Also, I really don't like the idea that Professor Xavier had an extra team that was sent to rescue the X-Men. That just makes him even more of a horrible person than he already was. He already had several things on his conscience that made him a pretty awful person. Right around this time, Joss Whedon was revealing that he knew about the Danger Room being a sentient alien being, and he kept it enslaved in order to train the X-Men. So right around this time, you got this 1-2 punch of he had a secret team of X-Men and he wiped everyone's memories of that team, and then he was also enslaving this alien being to train the X-Men. So Charles Xavier, this was not a good time for him. And I always liked Charles Xavier, specifically from the 1980s. I really like him in that period of time, not so much before and not so much after, really. Partly because all these writers thought it would be a really clever idea to make him be the kind of guy who is willing to go to any length in order to make his dream come true. In that regard, he's a lot like Magneto, if these stories are to be believed. I really don't like this addition to his character history, because it just makes him an even more reprehensible human being, and I kind of like this character. I don't like that everyone keeps making him this awful, horrible person. Overall, I really don't think there's anything good about this book. I think if you are not familiar with the X-Men, if you don't know anything about the previous 30 years of the X-Men history, this might work a little better for you than it worked for me. You would probably still say that all of this stuff about Gabriel's history is really convoluted and really stupid, like they artificially aged him. Why? They took a 2-month fetus and they artificially aged it? Why? Why would they do that? Why not just kill the baby? It's obviously not fully grown yet. It's not going to be able to survive unless you go through hoops to try and make it into a slave. Why go through so much trouble to make a slave? So even if you're not familiar with the previous stories of X-Men that this story tramples all over, this book still, it is pretty problematic. It's still got a lot of issues with it. The only thing that I could possibly say about this book is that it feels like they're really trying to make this be an interesting mystery. When you first start reading it, you've got no idea what's going on, and it's like, ooh, this is interesting, I want to know more. At the end of each issue, you've got this brief little backstory on each of these X-Men who were sent to rescue the original X-Men. You've got a story for Petra, Sway, Darwin, and eventually Kid Vulcan, who later is just called Vulcan. And I really like that it's like, okay, I don't know who Petra is, but this is interesting. I want to know more. Why are we getting her story now? Who is this crazy dude who has come down and murdered Banshee and has blown up this plane with hundreds of people on it? I want to know more. I want to know what's his connection to Cyclops and Professor X. Why does he claim that he knows these guys when they claim that they don't know him, or Cyclops at least claims he doesn't know him? All of that is just really nicely handled, even though none of the subplots, none of the plot points in this book actually make any sense. And I forgot to even talk about the death of Banshee. That's another one of those things where Banshee found that secret hidden tape on Muir Island, and he was bringing it to the X-Men, and for some reason Vulcan decided to destroy the plane that Banshee was on. Ed Brubaker once said that that was the most logical thing to do with Banshee's character, when that makes absolutely no sense at all. If Kid Vulcan or Vulcan wants to find Charles Xavier, he claims that the reason that he murdered everyone on that plane was to draw Xavier out. Okay, if that's what you want to do, go to a football stadium, say, hey, my name is Vulcan. If Charles Xavier doesn't come here in an hour, I'm going to start peeling the flesh off every Homo sapien in the stadium. Charles, get over here right now. If you want to draw Charles Xavier out, that's how you do that. What was really stupid about this is that he blows up this plane, but then he's hiding. The people who took surveillance footage of this plane blowing up, they had to comb over this footage many times before they finally said, hey, wait a minute, zoom in right there. There's a dude, like, flying right there. That's some guy who blew up this plane. It doesn't make any sense that he blew up this plane to draw out Xavier, because I'm pretty sure Xavier wouldn't have any reason to believe that this was one of his former students blowing up planes, especially since he thought all of these students were dead, if he's hiding in the middle of somewhere after the events of House of M. Also, I feel like they just killed off Banshee just so that they could draw out this, what's the contents of this tape. We've got to stall that a little bit so the tape gets damaged in the plane, and then it takes a few extra issues for us to find out what the contents of this tape are. So I guess that's the reason that they killed off Banshee, but it's still a really pointless, really stupid death, and unfortunately Banshee is one of those very few comic book deaths who he still has not really come back to life. He was brought back as a zombie in Uncanny Avengers by Rick Remender, but if you're a fan of Banshee, then you have Ed Brubaker to thank for the character no longer being part of the X-Men books. But anyway, I don't think this book is good. This book is really awful, and I don't know who to blame. I don't know how much of the blame should be put on Brubaker's shoulders or how much should be put on his bosses in editorial. I have no idea, but all I know is that this book is really terrible. I do not recommend anyone at all to buy or read this at all. This book should just be forgotten by everybody. Everyone should just pretend this book doesn't exist, because it's that bad. It's a really bad book. So those are my thoughts on X-Men Deadly Genesis. I hope that you guys liked this video. If you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will be doing other videos throughout the week, and I will also be doing more X-Men videos in the future, so be sure to check those out if you're interested. In the meantime, I hope you guys have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.